Welcome back to Baithak. Today in Khabar, we will be discussing the sentencing hearing for the RG rape case and what it means for the cases going forward. We'll also be discussing the reopening of the Pakhyong Airport and what that would conclude for the Indian Gorkhas in the area. And for Baithak, we'll be continuing our discussion from the previous episode. In Khabar today, the first thing I wanted to discuss was the sentencing hearing for the RG rape case that took place recently in a sessions court held by the Kolkata court on the 21st of January. The criminal who was arrested for this particular case was given a lifetime imprisonment. Now, the hearing has been quite controversial because the family of the victims actually wanted the death penalty for the criminal, and the court stated that it was not the rarest of rare cases, and that is why the death penalty could not be offered. Now, what exactly is the rarest of rare cases, and how exactly does rape sentencing work? To understand that, we need to understand Section 376 of the Indian Penal Code, which actually deals with rape. Now, it states that if it is a normal rape case, now I don't necessarily understand what a normal rape case is, but because all rape is quite disastrous in nature, but a normal rape case is given a 10-year imprisonment, a minimum of 10 years of imprisonment. Now, there are certain cases which are considered rarest of rare, which actually allow for the death penalty to be given. These are if the victim is under 16 years of age, if it is repeated offenses on the same victim, if there are repeated offenses during a period of time, if the victim is disabled, if the victim has been caused bodily harm, and so on. There are a few other cases as well. Now, apparently the court felt that it was not the rarest of rare cases. That is why only lifetime imprisonment was given. Now, this comes as quite a controversial hearing because the victims of the family actually wanted the death penalty, and since it was quite a huge crisis as well, and it was quite covered by the media as well, and it came into the pop culture a lot as well. A lot of people were expecting a very strict procedure and a very strict sentencing hearing. Now, if we look at a similar case which happened in Siliguri, the rape of a very young child and who was actually even murdered, and in that case, I'm not entirely sure what the differences were, but I believe it has to lie with the fact that the victim was under 16 years of age. So in that case, the criminal was given death penalty by the Siliguri court, and he is to be hanged to death in the near future. Now, I believe that the main difference that took place in these two cases was the age factor and the lack of evidence on the Arjika rape case as well. We do know that in the days leading up to the case, there was a lot of evidence tampering and there was a lot of cases and controversies that happened in that case as well. So I believe that has to do with it as well. And in the Siliguri rape case, it was quite cut and dry. The criminal was arrested within a few days and the evidence was quite hearty to begin with. Now, but I believe that since the Arjika rape case was such a big deal and it was such a talked about subject, that deserves a better hearing as well. Because now, since this was in the general pop culture so much, this is actually taken as an example by future rapists as well. That since this person only got a lifetime imprisonment, it is not such a big deterrent. And I feel that the courts should have looked at that case as well. But that is also one of the explanations given by the court that we cannot give a harder hearing just because it had become such a big case. Now, I believe that according to the law, they did what they had to do, but actually, I feel that the law needs to be looked at, the law needs to be discussed further, and the lawmakers of the country need to look at the penal code and describe a better punishment for rape cases. In the second point, I wanted to talk about the reopening of the Pakhyong Airport. After 10 months of it being closed and a lot of controversies surrounding the cancellation of flights, the delays of flights, and subpar amenities being provided by the Pakhyong Airport, the director of the Pakhyong Airport recently declared that flights would be resuming, and a lot of airlines such as Indigo, Air India, have declared that they would be running flights from Delhi, Hyderabad, Bangalore as well. So it seems that the Pakhyong Airport is coming up and being rejuvenated, but it does come at a certain level of ambiguity as well, because essentially we don't really know what exactly was wrong with Pakhyong Airport to begin with, and it seems quite funny that in 10 months no big changes were made, but now it seems that previously Pakhyong Airport was not exactly up to par, and now it is up to par and everything is going to be fine now. So we will see what exactly happens. But this is actually a trend of infrastructural developments being taken in the Siliguri corridor and the Darjeeling area. We will also know about the beautification and the opening of a new terminal at Bagdogra Airport. Recently, Prime Minister Modi himself came and laid down the foundation stone and actually granted a budget of 1,550 crores for the opening and construction of the new terminal and the beautification of the airport as well. There have been numerous other infrastructural projects as well. The national highway leading into the northeast is to be extended and made into a 16-lane highway. There have been other development projects which have been ruled up in the area as well. And Rajabishta himself in his inauguration ceremony talked about this, where he was going to bring in a lot of projects. He was going to work on promotion of tourism, going to give educational grants, and also going to work on the healthcare and the employment crisis currently plaguing the hills. Now, I feel this comes as a certain example. If you look at the general politics which is going on in India, the BJP government really wants to integrate the Northeast area with the rest of the country. It feels that they have been left quite aloof, and we, as the linking party, as the bridge between the Northeast region and the rest of India, form this integral area which is serving as a benchmark for the rest of the Northeast. The BJP government is essentially trying to say that look at the work we've done in this particular area, and this similar thing can be done for you, and we're trying to work towards you as well. There's a lot of projects which have been taken up in the Northeast as well, in Arunachal especially because of the recent military issues that have been going on. But I feel that we as Indian Gorkhas can really take advantage of this situation. Now, I do understand that political parties have a lot of ulterior motives and a lot of issues as well arise with that. But I feel we can really look at the nuance, and as long as development progress happens in the hills, it is always going to be a good thing. Because as discussed previously, Darjeeling area and the Sikkim area as well, not Sikkim as much, but the Darjeeling area and the Siliguri corridor area really lack in infrastructural amenities. And if we could have development on those areas, if we would have better roads, better parking facilities, better drainage facilities because of these developments, then it's always going to be a good thing. In Better today, I actually wanted to continue the discussion we were having on the previous episode, and I actually wanted to look at a few particular facets of how exactly the identity crisis is affecting us. Now, to begin with, I actually wanted to talk about the social identification theory and how the hierarchy was affecting us. Now, as we discussed in the previous episode, the group hierarchy plays a very essential role in the sense where the group leaders, who are the higher members of the hierarchy, essentially dictate what the beliefs are, what the various goals are, and what the mannerisms and behavior of the group are. And that is actually what the rest of the group members mimic and what they actually aspire to. Now, I feel that we as the Indian Gorkha community have actually been quite lacking in that area, where our group leaders are more or less not very up to the mark, or in most times non-existent. Most of the time we see, if you look at our recent past, that most of our group leaders have been of a political nature. Now, I'm not saying that having political leaders is a bad thing. I'm not saying that at all. Of course, we need to have political leaders looking after our political needs as well. But it becomes a bad thing when we only have political leaders. There are a lot of other facets where we need political leaders, where we need leaders as well, where we need role models. And I feel that is an area where we as a community are really lacking. Now, if you look at the different facets, we need economic leaders as well, we need literary leaders as well, we need cultural leaders as well, we need military leaders as well, because we are a militaristic community, so to speak. So, if we look at these facets, we can see that leaders in these areas are more or less non existent. If you look at the economical basis, there have hardly been any successful businessmen of the Indian Gorkha community where they have actually reached a zenith and can actually consider themselves role models for the rest of the community. The only real person I can really think of is Mr. Sadeep Lama, the founder of the Sumiya Shri chains of hotels and industries. Now, I really consider him to be a really successful businessman and entrepreneur, and I really do respect him. He has really achieved a lot of success throughout his lifetime, and that is quite evident if you go through the Darjeeling Hills and the Sikkim area. You will hardly be able to go a few miles without seeing one of his many, many establishments. And he has actually been able to really coalesce the tourism industry. He's a hearty businessman, and I believe he is someone that we can really look up to as future entrepreneurs and future businessmen of the Indian Gorkha community. But what I mean to say is that he is just one person. He is just one entity who has actually found success. And in the past few years and the past few decades as well, you may have noticed that there have been many businesses which come up. There have been many entrepreneurs who try their hand into the business game, but hardly any of them ever succeed. Hardly any of them go beyond the 1 or 2 year mark, and most of them give up before ever reaching any sort of success. Now, I believe a lot of this has to do with the lack of role models as well. There are a lot of other facets which are affecting this, but I feel that the lack of role models is also one of the big factors, because they don't really have anyone to look up to and see their success and aspire to that. It's mostly just a ragtag bunch of businessmen who are actually competing with each other, and small successes essentially mean a lot to them. But if we could have a lot of other economists and a lot of other businessmen and entrepreneurs really succeed as well, and if they could form a tight-knit community. There are a lot of historical businessmen and entrepreneurs in Darjeeling district as well. There are a lot of families who own a lot of businesses for a lot of generations and are quite well known in the community as well. If these people and if these businessmen could actually bundle together, if they could form a sort of group and then coalesce, corroborate with each other, and actually provide a lot of sound advice to the new entrepreneurs as well, that would be a wonderful environment in which businesses in Darjeeling and businesses of the Gorkha community could actually grow. But that is more or less non-existent in the current times, because I feel that sense of group identity is very weak. We don't really have a sense of belonging, we don't really have a sense of togetherness. There's only a lot of competition which takes place, and that really hinders our ability to form groups and actually corroborate with each other. Now, that is one part of it. The second part I really wanted to look into was the literary part as well. There are a lot of books which come out on a regular basis. There are a lot of writers, there are a lot of poets who constantly write about the Indian Gorkha community and who write about the Gorkhaland Revolution and how it has affected us. But most of them actually go under the radar, and I don't believe any of them has really reached the levels of fame that they are capable of. Because again, it comes to the identity crisis, because we don't really feel belonged, we don't really feel a sense of togetherness, and that identity crisis is really seeping into the literary forms as well, because most of these literary writers, they write about things that we should be carrying as a group, but when we don't really have a sense of belonging with the group, it becomes very difficult to relate to these subjects. It becomes really difficult to actually feel the emotions that they are speaking of. So again, the identity crisis has led to a downfall in literary leaders as well, because although there are a lot of writers and poets, not only in the current time but in the past as well, Darjeeling has always been a hotbed of literary works, and that has been really sad to see in the past few years because the literary interest has really gone down. And this, I feel, is a result of the identity crisis that we are facing, where we don't really feel belonging to the group, and essentially that causes issues in the literary works as well. Now, if you look at the cultural aspect of it, politics actually plays a very big role. So we are quite steadfast in that place, but there are a lot of other facets of culture as well. We need proper religious works as well. We need proper cultural, traditional works as well. We are a tight knit community of many, many, many communities and tribes, and each of us need to get in touch with our culture and tradition. I was actually planning a series of works where we could explore each and every single tribe and community. And I feel that will help, but at the end of the day, we need community leaders as well. And I'm not saying that there aren't any community leaders. There are a lot of people who are doing a lot of hard work trying to preserve the various cultures and traditions of each and every one of our tribes. Each and every one of our tribes have their own languages as well. And there are a lot of people who are working really hard to keep that alive, to keep that preserved. But since the majority of the public doesn't really have that sense of group belonging, doesn't really have that sense of identity, that is causing a lot of issues because, as discussed in the previous episode, there is a severe lack of empathy, there is a severe lack of belonging, and that causes issues within the identity of the group. And since the group identity is very weak to begin with, it becomes very difficult to care. It becomes very difficult to actually corroborate and actually feel for the works of the group. And I feel this also can be solved if we can have a group crisis solved. But what happens is it's actually a symbiotic process. At the same time where we are looking further into culture, at the same time where we are looking further into literary works, at the same time where we are looking further into economic groups, it needs to go hand in hand with the implementation of the group identity as well. Once the group identity gets a bit stronger, we need to work harder towards these facets as well. And working harder in these facets will help the group identity as well. And they will go hand in hand and work together towards a better future. But one part of it has really been lagging, and the second part of it cannot really work without the group identity. Essentially, the group leaders can try their best, but as long as until the group does not care, most of their efforts will be in the wind and it won't really matter in the long run. And the militaristic aspect of it suffers from the same crisis. Our community has always been a very military community. A lot of our members have always been members of the army, and we've always been one of the most bravest, one of the most steadfast, one of the most disciplined soldiers there ever could be. Gorkha soldiers are considered one of the best, if not the best soldiers in the world. And it does seem sad that in the recent past that a lot of our youth has not been really looking into this as a proper career opportunity. A lot of people are moving away from the militaristic ideas as well. And it's not like we have a lack of heroes. It's not like we have a lack of role models. Constantly, many Gorkha soldiers constantly achieve high military awards, constantly achieve tremendous goals in their services, but it kind of goes under the wind. It kind of goes like water under the bridge. We don't really seem to care. We don't really seem to have that sense of belonging because, again, the identity crisis is so weak. The identity and belonging of the community with the group is so weak that it becomes very difficult to relate. It becomes very difficult to see them as part of our own because we don't really understand what that own is. We have a very ambiguous nature about what the group is, and despite of the many successes in these small facets, the big failure of the Gorkha community to not get Gorkha land has been a big hurdle which our community, I feel, has not been able to pass, and that causes a lot of issues with group identity. And now if we move on from the leadership role, we can look at how the self-esteem has really affected the Gorkha community as well. I discussed in the previous episode, the group identity plays a major role in creating a sense of self-worth. It plays a major role in creating a sense of self-esteem within the individual, because when you are a member of a group which is working towards common goals, which is working towards successes, and you are a part of that group as well, and you are dedicating your time and effort towards the completion of these goals, then that instills a strong sense of purpose within you, and which is very, very important, especially as a youth. Because as a youth, we are filled with energy and we almost consider ourselves invincible in that nature. So we are constantly looking for projects to undertake, we are constantly looking for goals to achieve, and we have so much energy and want and need, in fact, to expend that energy into proper works, into proper channels. But when the group identity is weak, when the goals of the community have been so difficult to achieve, and there have been numerous failures in the achievement of these goals, it really gives a hard strike towards the self-worth of the individual, especially of the youth. And we can see this in the youth of the Indian Gorkha community currently. It is with a heavy heart that I say that the rampant drug crisis that is currently going on in the Indian Gorkha community has a lot of it to do with the identity crisis as well. Because I feel that, and I do want to reiterate that this is only a small part, and I will be doing a deeper dive into the drug crisis of the Indian Gorkha youth, but I feel that the identity crisis has been playing a major role as well, where our community's youth does not really feel that their community has been doing a lot for them. They feel that it's not really worth working towards the betterment of the group. It's not really worth feeling that you are an Indian Gorkha and feeling actually proud of it and working towards the betterment of it. And that has led to a severe lack in purpose. And a youth requires purpose. A youth requires purpose to thrive, because they need to expend that energy. And once they see their energy being given into proper goals, into proper achievement of goals, that is where they derive their self-worth and their self-esteem. But in the absence of this, in the absence of a proper group identity, and in the absence of the belonging nature, and in the absence of purpose, that self-esteem takes a big hit. And anyone who knows drugs knows that a low self-esteem is the quickest way towards using drugs, because when you have low self-esteem, drugs seems like an escape. Drugs seems like the perfect opportunity to actually get away from this entire crisis. So that has been the self-esteem aspect of it. And now let's move on to the individual mobility aspect of it. As I spoke in the previous episode, individual mobility is basically when you are not happy with your group, you are not happy with the successes of the group, you are not happy with the goals or the achievements of the group, and you want to, or in the other aspect, the group is not exactly well defined, it is a very ambiguous group, and you don't really feel a sense of belonging with that group. So in these cases, what happens is that the individual seeks purpose, the individual seeks self-worth, so they will move on to other groups. That is what happens. That is what individual mobility is, and that is what we can see happening in the Indian Gorkha youth community as well. The Western culture has been the biggest influence and the biggest other core group that the youth has flocked towards. In the absence of the Indian Gorkha community to root towards, to belong towards, we have adopted Western ideology and Western culture as the group that we want. Because, of course, with the advent of social media, with the advent of globalization, with the advent of consumerism as well, Western culture has been so accessible to us. It is literally in the palm of our hands. So that actually causes a lot of connection. And most of the trends that we see in social media, most of the trends that we see in pop culture actually originate from Western culture. So it becomes very easy, and it's a very easy path to take when your actual community is facing such issues. So it is just natural to see how hip hop culture has taken such a stronghold within the Indian Gorkha youth, how liberal ideology has taken such a strong hold within the Indian youth. Now, I'm not saying that's entirely a bad thing. I have talked about this in previous episodes as well, how Western ideology is a double-edged sword in the sense that when utilized properly, it can lead to good things as well. But it is quite funny to see that Indian Gorkha youth care so much about Western ideologies, but we don't really care about our own community as well. Most of the conversations you see are talks about environmentalism, it talks about feminism, it talks about veganism, it talks about trans ideology and all these things. And I'm not saying these are bad things to talk about, but I'm saying it would make more sense to talk about these things after we've talked about the issues of the Indian Gorkhas, after we have essentially discussed Indian Gorkha issues to its zenith, to its limit, and then we can discuss all these things. Because it does not make sense. These are not our ideas. These are not things we came up with. These are not the issues we face on a regular basis. But since we don't really have a strong group belonging, we don't really have a strong identity to feel with our community, we feel that we need to actually corroborate to these things because, as I said, youth, and not just the youth, people require purpose. They require self-worth, and it is an innate need. If the group cannot provide it for you, there will be individual mobility. And the third category to which you can essentially move to is the individual. If you are not happy with the current group that you are in, it's not providing you purpose, then you can obviously move to another group, but you can actually just let go of groups and just become an individual as well. And that is also not a bad thing. It means that you will be focusing more on your individual successes. You'll be looking at yourself as an individual. You'll be looking at your successes as an individual, but the group does severely suffer because of that. And we can see this happening as well. Most of the prolific members of our community, the more successful members, don't really credit their growth or their success to the community, but actually credit it towards themselves, and they don't really feel a sense of belonging as well. And when the group entirely looks at their successes as well, they don't really look at it as a success of the group. They don't really look at it as the success of the community. They see it as individual successes and achievements. And that is also a bad thing, because at the end of the day, if we don't have empathy, if we don't have group belonging, each and everyone is going to look after their own needs and wants. And where will the group go then? Because at the end of the day, we are social creatures. We need to live in groups. We need to survive in groups. And the groups actually form a very integral part of our identity as well. So these are the various ways I feel in which the identity crisis is really hampering our society. And if we could solve these issues, I know it's a big daunting task. It's not going to be something that's going to happen overnight. But if we could solve these issues, then we will see one of the most beautiful things come out, which is the sense of empathy, which is the sense of group empathy. Once that is tapped into, once that comes to the forefront, then we will all see ourselves as one unit. We will all see ourselves as something. When each one of us falls, it will not just be that one person falling, it'll be all of us falling. And all of us will work towards getting that person back up together. But unless and until that does not happen, these things will continue. A lot of the issues that are currently going on in the Darjeeling Hills, the tea garden workers crisis, the joblessness of the youth, the rampant drug crisis, it does not really feel like our problems. It does not really feel like we care a lot. And I'm really sad to say that, but I myself am a victim of that. When I hear issues of the tea garden workers in the hills, when I hear about issues of the joblessness of the youth, when I hear about the rampant drug crisis, I don't really care. And I believe this is a sentiment shared by a lot of people. And that is because we lack a severe sense of group empathy. And that can only be brought about if we can solve the identity crisis. And that is the only way the group can work together. So that is it for today. And I would love to discuss these topics further in the further episodes, and I will be doing a deep dive into a lot of other topics as well. There are a lot of projects coming up in Baithak. I'm really excited to bring these to you. But that is all for today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Godspeed to you all.